Oh boy. Hey Booktube, it's Kim at Middle of the Book March, and today's video is the long-awaited video of my opinions about Jane Austen books. I know you've all been holding your breath waiting for this to come out. All right, maybe 2 or 3 of you have, but I just finished reading my last Jane Austen novel of her 6 main novels. And what else have I read? I've read a couple of other things, I think. So I wanted to talk about it. Jane Austen is a big deal on Booktube, and I think Jane Austen is a big deal in pretty much literature, not just English literature. So I think all of her novels have been in print since their publication, if I'm not mistaken. If I'm wrong, you can correct me in the comments below. Hint, hint. So let me talk about them. The title of my video or the caption in the thumbnail is not clickbait. I am resigned to the fact that I will receive a lot of feedback, but I am not a Jane Austen superfan, and I'll tell you why. Jane Austen's books revolve primarily around the English aristocracy, and the stories kind of show us snapshots of their lives, whether it's young women who are getting ready to get married, whether it's a family who is constantly talking about needing to marry their daughters off. It is the snapshots of families and aristocratic, entertaining, and finding ways to spend their time, the English countryside. And ultimately, I'll get a lot of arguments over this. The majority, excuse me, if not all, of Austen's novels are romances. Romance is not the central theme. It's not the point of reading a Jane Austen novel, but at the end of every book, there is a marriage and there is a romance. Am I right? Yes, I am right. I am right on that one point. So Jane Austen can be very funny. She's written a lot of satire, a lot of parody. She could be very comical and sarcastic and illuminating to the graces and the foibles of aristocracy. She talks a lot about women and marriage. Back in Jane Austen's day, a woman had nothing, and the only way a woman could improve her station in life was to marry well. Women were not allowed to inherit money or property. All inheritance went to male relatives, whether it was a brother, a son, a grandson, a nephew, a cousin. So women were not able to inherit their family homes, their family wealth. They had to marry well, and then all of their property became the property of their husbands, which of course was not at all fair. And I think Austen was commenting on the status of women and the reasons why women were forced, highly encouraged, or pushed into marriage. It was because that was the only way they would be supported. Parents typically were not going to consider or look forward to supporting a young woman for her whole life if she did not get married. And we see that in most of these novels. The other thing that Austen writes about is why a woman would get married, and she has a lot to say about marrying for love versus marrying for duty or marrying for being in a position of support. And I think that's a very big message in the majority of Austen's novels. She's not saying that marriage is a happily ever after, but she is saying marriage should be for the right reasons. Is Jane Austen a feminist? As by today's standards, not really, but in the time in which she was writing, yes, because she lived that life. She was engaged, but then called off an engagement, I think the day after or very quickly after the proposal, and she never married before she died very young in her 40s. But all of these books have something to say about marriage and why a woman should marry and why a woman should not marry. But each of the books, for me, some are far more successful than others. There are some books I just could not stand reading. I finished all of them, but I couldn't stand them. And I got bored with the similar themes and techniques that she uses through all of her novels. The characters are very different. There's very different storylines, but I think she tends to use the same writing techniques and the same plot and character techniques throughout each book. And I felt like, along with the differences in storylines, I felt like I was reading too much of the same. I got bored with reading about all the balls and the clothes and the dances and who's visiting who and which lady or lord is coming into town and who's gossiping about who. I actually did get quite sick of that. And fortunately, or whatever, however you want to define it, the most favorite of the Austen books for me are the ones I read earlier and the ones I read first. And it could be coincidental. I don't think it is. But let's go through them and I'll tell you what I think. And my favorite might be surprising. I just finished Mansfield Park, and it was my least favorite Austen. I really struggled finishing this book. Had it not been for a buddy read with Heidi at My Reading Life and Joe Smith, I probably would have DNF'd it and said, I'm all set, I'm all done, and not looked back. But I did force myself to finish it, unfortunately. This is the story of Fanny Price. Now, I'm not going to go too deeply into the plots of the novel. Any of the novels. But the reason I didn't like Mansfield Park so strongly, I'm not going to say hate, but the reason I disliked it so strongly is I was bored to tears, and a lot of it had to do with, it was a very closed up story. Almost all of it took place at Mansfield Park, the estate, in the house. And it was, this person's visiting, that person's visiting, this person is going visiting. They're trying to create relationships between the young women in the family and eligible bachelors around the countryside. And of course, in order to do that, you have to get all the young people together. So this person goes to that house and that person stays here, and they have a dance and a ball and a party and a dinner. And it was much of the same throughout the book. Fanny Price is a very submissive, in the background character, which didn't make sense for me because she's supposedly the protagonist and the main character storyline in this novel. And I just did not really relate to her as a character. I don't need to like the characters. She can be an unlikable person, but she wasn't interesting. If the main character in the book is not interesting to me, the book is not going to be interesting. And I just really did not like this. I didn't believe it was as funny or as comical as her other novels. It was a little bit of a darker tone in that Fanny Price comes to Mansfield Park and to the Bertrams, her uncle and aunt, at the age of 11. And so she's basically treated like a poor relation. She's kind of given a room way at the top of the house, kind of isolated. She's not treated like one of the daughters. She's definitely separated out. Her aunt, Mrs. Norris, is a very mean and calculating woman who purposefully sets her apart in order to make her feel set apart and humiliated. So it wasn't as funny as the other novels were to me. There were definitely some moments. There were definitely characters that were ridiculous. And this was my least favorite, and not sorry to say that. Now, that actually took the spot of least favorite when I thought it was going to be Northanger Abbey. I thought this was a very short, very silly novel, supposedly gothic in tone. Catherine Morland is a teenager who is wrapped up in the mysteries of Udolpho from Anne Radcliffe, and she sees mystery and intrigue everywhere she looks. And she goes to visit the Abbey, Northanger Abbey, expecting it to be this scary, ghosty, haunted, dark Gothic place, and it is somewhat, but it's actually a person's home. But again, it's more of the same. It's more of, let's get Catherine out into society. Let's hook her up with this person. Hopefully they'll fall in love. If they won't, they'll just form an attachment. There's a lot of the word attachment throughout the novels because young people were supposed to form an attachment in order to get married. But I just thought it was too silly. It wasn't satirical enough for me. It wasn't that Jane Austen style for me. No. And then we have Emma. I love the Emma adaptations, except for the one with Gwyneth Paltrow. I cannot stand that one. I don't like Gwyneth Paltrow. Can't stand her as an actress. But the other adaptations for Emma, I really enjoy. I just did not love the book. I thought it was okay. It's kind of my middle of the road. I gave Emma, I think, 3 stars. I couldn't help thinking of Clueless as I was reading this novel, which is okay. Clueless is a great way to adapt the book of Emma. But I thought Emma was snobby and childish and immature, and of course she has a growth arc through the novel. Of course she starts to come to some realizations. I don't know. I just thought this was an example of a main character who comes from a very wealthy background. There was a lot of superficiality, a lot of meanness. This starts to ratchet up the humor in Austen's writing. There were some very funny characters, very funny situations. Emma's family, her father, who is a hypochondriac, and her sister, who has a bunch of children, and the father worrying so much about everybody. He's not just his own hypochondriac, but he worries about everybody around him. It does get very funny, but the attitude of Emma is not my favorite. Just the acceptance of her wealth. The thing that she does choose is she's at first doesn't think she's ever going to get married, because why should she? She has money. She has a home. She doesn't need a man's support. So at first you hear those attitudes, you're like, all right, go Emma, go for it. But at the end, it's a love story, and she does find love in marriage. So it was okay. It was okay. I just recently read Persuasion last year with a reading group with Gemma from Gemma Books and Jack from Spread Bookjoy, and I really enjoyed Persuasion. This is one of my favorite adaptations out of the Austen novels, and not the Dakota Johnson version. I thought that was an abysmal adaptation. It was horrible. Horrible, horrible. I could talk about that. I think I already talked about it when I reviewed Persuasion. But I really loved the story. And the adaptation with Kieran Hines, I think that's his name. Yeah, I think so. Lovely. I loved it. I really enjoyed this book. I enjoyed the character of Anne Elliot. She's also kind of a quiet character, reserved, but she's much older than Fanny Price. She's 10 years older. She's been through some things. She's gone through life. She's been in love. She knows what that is. She has regrets. She is looking back in time. She is looking at her present life, and none of it is what she would have chosen for herself. There are very interesting characters in Persuasion. Her sister is hilarious. She has very youngish cousins that are lovely people, but very, very silly teenage girls, but they're lovable. And the resolution to this story is a little far-fetched, but satisfying. And it's just a lovely way to end the book, a lovely circumstance, a lovely situation that these two people pining for each other over a number of years, and how that is resolved. So I really loved Persuasion. She's a much more mature character. It's not nearly as filled with the British aristocracy and the wealth and the balls and all of that. There is a lot of dinners, a lot of talk about money and wealth, but it was a much more mature story, still funny, and a lovely conclusion. I really liked it. My top 2, not going to come as any surprise, I don't think. Sense and Sensibility is my number 2. but I still loved it. I love this book. I love the movie. I love the BBC adaptation. Eleanor and Marianne Dashwood, and this is a great example of an Austen book that discusses the status of women and their lack of the opportunity to inherit. This is a story with 3 daughters. Their father has died, and he has a son from his prior marriage. The son inherits everything. So the widow and their 3 daughters get nothing. So they have to figure out, what are they going to do? They have nothing. And the son is supposed to help them financially, but he continues to cut what he's going to give to them and cut their standards. And so it's basically them scraping a life together after death and grief and mourning, and coming up with a way to support themselves. They do, and they are very pragmatic about it, but there's also so much humor and so many characters that not just make you laugh, but make you smile, and they add something to the story. It is a love story in several different examples, and I just have so much fondness for this book. I believe this was the first adaptation of an Austen novel that I ever saw and absolutely fell in love with. And read the book after seeing the adaptation and still loved it. And number 1 of the novels is Pride and Prejudice, and there is my Mr. Darcy, Colin Firth. I just believe this is an exemplary novel. Not even just a Jane Austen novel, but it's such an artistically written, satirical, comical, beautiful, complex story, and it's such a fantastic book, almost on the verge of being in a very small number of novels that I believe are perfect. And it's so many people's favorites, but trying not to be stereotypical, but it truly is my favorite Austen. And I do have to admit, I read this many, many years ago and really didn't like it. And the only thing that made me pick it up was just the reviews from people. Not even, this was far before Booktube. Just how many people absolutely loved this book and how many times they've reread it. I think I've read it 3 or 4 times. The audiobook is fantastic. It is just hilarious. It had me laughing out loud. But this is definitely Jane Austen's finest work, in my opinion. And I just thought it is spectacular. So I loved it. There is I haven't told you what my absolute favorite is. And Pride and Prejudice is just an excellent novel. Easy 5 stars. I love the book. I may reread it. I may reread Sense and Sensibility. But my favorite Austen and my favorite character is Lady Susan. And that novella is included in this bind-up of Northanger Abbey. Lady Susan, the Watsons, and Sanditon. Lady Susan, this is an epistolary novella and long story. And she is evil and naughty and cynical and quite possibly sociopathic, but I absolutely love this character. It's hilarious and dark and criminal, but I just love this novella. It was wonderful, and I think that novella fits my personality better than any of the other 6 main novels of Austen's, and I thought that's absolutely, if you haven't read Lady Susan, very wildly outside the normal style and technique of Austen, but worth the read, fantastic. So those are my rankings of all of the Austens that I've read. I am not a person who has Austen on a pedestal, so I am not gonna do the Jane Austen Julys on BookTube. I've had my fill of Jane Austen. I am not sure. Here's the cynical nature coming out, and this is not meant to be a challenging observation, but I'm not sure why Austen is on that pedestal. There are so many incredible authors of this age, of the Victorian age, that, I don't know, you can put their whole compilation of writing on a pedestal, but I tend not to do that. And I tend to judge every book individually. loose exception, maybe George Eliot, but I don't believe George Eliot was a perfect author. I don't believe she was a perfect person. And I do know of so many people who believe Austen is perfect or was perfect, and her novels are perfect. Pride and Prejudice may very well be one of those perfect novels, but I'm not one that is going to continue to reread and reread and reread every Austen. So, I already know what many of you think about Jane Austen's novels and her stories and her writings. That's just my opinion. I'm good. I'm all set with Austen. I'll continue to watch the movies probably forever because I love the movies. The majority of the movies are so well done. Absolutely love them. So tell me in the comments below what you think of Jane Austen, what you think of any of the books I ranked, what I said about any of my reviews, and we'll have it out. We'll have conversations in the comments. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye, everybody.